Hi students, let's take a few minutes and go through the makeup work that you may need for September 1st and 2nd. This is day 2 and 3 of our new unit. You, I'm guessing, are in your classroom and you have found today's assignment. This first part tells you what we did in class. And we did a little bit of 3 in most of the classes today, but we all finished 1, 2, and 4. So, and if you didn't finish 4 in your classes, that would have been homework. So, if you scroll on down here, you'll see the makeup work. And so we're going to start off with looking at bell ringer for day 2. So if you click on the slides that you have here, this is what should come up. And so take just a second and do the bell ringer. That you have done your bell ringer. Do you look just like your sibling? Or if you don't have siblings, if you're thinking of other siblings, do they look absolutely identical to each other? Well, of course, when we think about that, the answer is no. Even identical twins often have at least small changes or small things that are different between them. So when we're talking about siblings, they don't look identical. And we're going to do a little bit of exploration on figuring out why that is true. I would like for you now put up your bell ringer and go back over to classroom. And I would like you to open up the genetics of Sesame Street characters. You can do this online if you're in quarantine, or you can print it out if you have a printer at home. If you are just out for a day or so, you probably have this sheet from class, and so you can use that. If you are at home in quarantine, you're probably not going to end up being able to print this out. Or maybe you are. I don't know if you got a printer at home or not. But we're going to spend some time working this. So you'll need a copy of this, either electronic or pencil and paper. So I would like for you to take a look on your paper here. So I would like you to open up the genetics of Sesame Street characters file here that you have, or get out your paper if you have it. And I would like you to read through the introduction. While you're reading through the introduction, I would like you to mark any words that might be unusual to you, or that you might think that maybe you need a little bit of help with. Okay, so let's take a look at a few of those words that you might need some help with. Some people had identified karyotyping as a word that might need some explanation, and you can take a look at that, or we will take a look at that later on. Karyotyping basically involves actually visualizing the chromosomes that exist within a cell. We'll talk about that in a bit. What we find out if we visualize the Muppet chromosomes is that there's a chromosome 1, there's a chromosome 2, and then there's an X and Y chromosome. So there are 3 pairs of chromosomes within these Muppets. Chromosomes are made up of DNA. So chromosomes are made up of DNA, and that DNA is made up of base pairs, and certain segments of the DNA will actually code for the genetic information that gives us the characteristics that we have. So let's take a look at a few more things that you might need to know about. So I've switched over to Cami so that I can do a little bit of typing here and give you some better information about what we talked about in class today. Within DNA, we have what are called base pairs. So A's and T's match up, B's and C's match up. When we look at this, we call this a gene. And so this, when we look at what the actual makeup is um, for a particular Muppet or for a particular person, we would call this the genotype. And this is the genetic makeup of the organism. Now, what does this look like? So, what does this code for? That word, and this is one of your vocab words, that word is phenotype. So, a phenotype is the observable traits of an organism, in this case, of a Muppet. So, when we're talking about genotypes and phenotypes, we're talking about either the actual genetic information or what we can see expressed or what we can observe about that particular organism. Now, I'd like you to take a second and look at this next set of information that I put up and see if you can see, is there a difference or not. Here's the other strand of DNA. Are these identical? No, they're not. So if you take a look at this and you say that right here we have a difference as compared to right here, then you would be correct. And so these are two different forms of the gene, and we call those alleles. Those are two different forms of the gene. We need to be able to identify these two genes and not just have to go through all of this information. This is about 7 or 8 base pairs. An actual gene would possibly have upwards of 1,000 base pairs. So that's a whole lot of information to try to sift through and figure out, are these the same or are they not? So scientists, being just a little bit lazy, but also quite smart and willing to save time, use some different symbols. So scientists often use uppercase and lowercase letters. Now, we're going to talk about what these mean. Let me change my color back here. So, we're going to talk about something that is dominant, and this means that this characteristic always shows up, it's always observable. If the form of the gene is present. And this is noted by a capital letter. Other thing that I want you to note is called recessive. And this characteristic only shows up if there are two recessive forms of the trait. And this uses a lowercase letter. Okay, so we have an uppercase letter and a lowercase letter. And we can see these over here to the side. And this is a good way to be able to kind of use a shorthand for the information that's here present. So what does all of this mean? You would be able to come back and take a look at this information if you want to, or you can write it down. You can pause and write it down if you'd like. So we're going to take just a little bit of time and we're going to look over here at these different characteristics. So the Muppets have different characteristics. We're only going to work mostly in this class with dominant and recessive types of inheritance. We'll see what all of the rest of this looks like, the incomplete dominance, the multiple alleles, and the sex linked traits, but they're not super important for us to know the difference. Really, for any of these down here, you just need to be able to read the chart, figure out what the phenotype is, and then figure out what the genotype is from that. So we're going to start out by looking at Abby. So if we look over our uh, at our slides presentation, here's Abby, and so we're going to take a look at some different characteristics about her, and we're going to fill those in on the Genetics of Sesame Street Characters sheet. So the first thing that we'll want to look at is what kind of eyes does Abby have? And Abby has what we call flat eyes. So I'm going to go back over to the sheet and I'm going to type in here that she has flat eyes. And that information comes from right up here for the eye shape. So she's got flat eyes. That's the phenotype. So I'm going to write that in. And this tells me what the genotype is. So this is called homozygous recessive. Homozygous recessive. We're just going to write in the two lowercase e's. Then for her nose color, we'll take a look again at Abby. And her nose color, it's a little bit hard to tell, but we kind of guessed and said, oh, we think it's pink. So we went with pink for the nose color. And if you look at the genotypes, there are two different ones that are present. So you can either have homozygous, which means two of the same, dominant, or you can have heterozygous. And heterozygous means different. So you have one dominant allele or one dominant form of the gene and one recessive form of the gene. So when we take a look through this part right here, you can probably the easiest thing to put down is just both homozygous dominant or heterozygous. And that's what I'll write in here. So homozygous dominant or heterozygous. And then we'll go on over to lip color for Abby. Abby's lip color, we'll use probably the same color as her fur or whatever this is here, and that's going to be magenta. So for lip color, I'm going to say magenta, and that's going to be homozygous dominant. And body color, we're also going to say that that is magenta. And so we'll go up here and look. Magenta is right here, a capital B and a capital O. And then hair type, she has hair. So we're going to say she's hairy. And there's a specific way of showing this in terms of it being sex linked, but it's kind of hard to do in typing. So it is perfectly fine for our purposes just to say either homozygous dominant or heterozygous. This will work just fine for us. So here's the information that you need for Abby. I would like for you to take this information and try to fill in Grover, Elmo, and Zoe on your own. Take a few minutes and do that. Okay, so this is what Abby's information looked like. This is what Abby's information looked like. This is what we just did. And then if you have filled out Grover, Elmo, and Zoe, this is what Grover, Elmo, and Zoe should look like. And now I would like you to check your work, make sure that you have it done correctly. And then once you have it done correctly, I would like for you to fill out whoever the last two are here, Honker and the other one that's on here. Okay, so now that you filled out Telly and Honker, I forgot Telly's name. Now that you filled out Telly and Honker, go ahead and check and make sure that you have all of this correct. So this whole chart should be filled out now, either by pencil and paper, or it should be filled out in the electronic file that you have. Now that you've gotten all of that filled out, let's go back and look at the day 3 bell ringer. In class, this isn't the order that we did it, but I think it'll work for us as makeup. And I would like you to take a look at Elmo's parents. So Elmo's parents are right here. I would like you to look at Elmo's parents. And for the bell ringer, go ahead and put this in your notebook, please. I would like you to identify what characteristics Elmo shares with his parents and what characteristics maybe he doesn't. Maybe Elmo has some characteristics that don't match his parents. And so I would like you to take a look and see what you think about that. Okay, now that you have thought through your bell ringer for today, I would like you to make sure that you work on your vocabulary. And those vocabulary words are at the very end of today's set of slides. I'm working off of my master set, but you have a glossary with these terms. So meiosis and gamete, also with the little sub-definition here of haploid. So that's going to be 5 real definitions that you have in, plus this definition of haploid. And I think that's all that we're going to do for makeup today. If you are coming back into class tomorrow, then you'll do some drawing with us. If you are still out on quarantine, then I'll put up the video for the drawing tomorrow.